So in this video, we'll start looking at order of operations. So order of operations really has 4 steps to it. The first step is parentheses. So order of operations are there to tell us when we have a mathematical expression, what operations are we supposed to do first, and what operations then come second, what operations then come third when we have multiple operations together in one expression. So the first things that we will do are parentheses. So that tells us if we've got parentheses, operations inside those parentheses, somebody is specifically saying we're going to do those first. Now, parentheses are kind of one example. More generally, what those are grouping symbols. And so we'll see we can use the division bar as grouping symbols. We have different kinds of parentheses that we can use. Sometimes they're parentheses, sometimes they're brackets, but the parentheses are there to tell us specifically we're going to do this first. The second one that we will do are exponents. So exponents, we talked about those in another previous video, so if you want to go back and review that, you can go back and take a look at that video. But first we would do parentheses, then we would do exponents. Third, we would do multiplication and division. So multiplication and division are actually done on the exact same step, but we will do them left to right. So if we've got multiplication and division both showing up in the expression, we'll work those from left to right. And then finally, the last step that we would have are addition and subtraction. And again, we would do addition and subtraction on the last on the same step, but we will also do those also from left to right if those happen to show up. We've got both of them showing up in the same expression. We will do them from left to right. So that's kind of the order of operations. Sometimes people remember that through the PEMDAS, so parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, and then addition and subtraction. There's lots of different ways to remember that, but let's go through now and work several examples to see how that actually looks in action. So let's begin by looking at an example where we only have 2 operations. So suppose that we're asked to simplify 2 times 3 plus 8. How would our order of operations actually come out to play in this? Well, the first thing that we need to do when we are given that expression is actually to identify what operations we have going on. And so for that, we see that here we've got the operation of multiplication, and here we've got the operation of addition. And so if we go back and think about, all right, which one of these are we supposed to do first? Multiplication is going to be the one that we would do first, and addition then is second. So doing multiplication first, we would multiply 2 times 3 to give us 6, and then 6 plus 8 to give us 14. So now let's do another example that involves an evaluation with some parentheses. So the thing that you're really kind of keying in when you are looking at this particular expression is that we do have a set of parentheses. Now, what those parentheses are going to tell us is that anything inside the parentheses, this is what somebody is setting aside and saying, you need to evaluate everything inside this first. And so those are the operations that we're going to focus on at the beginning. So inside the parentheses, we see that we've got an operation of addition and we've got an operation of exponentiation. And so order of operations says exponents come first, and addition is going to come second. And so when it comes to exactly evaluating this, Then we concentrate on the inside first, so we do the exponent first. So 3 times 3 is going to give us a value of 9. So inside the parentheses, now we're down to just the operation of addition. So finishing the inside of the parentheses, 2 plus 9 is going to give us 11. And then finally, our operation, 4 times 11, is going to give us a final answer of 44. So now let's look at another example. Suppose we're asked to evaluate the quantity 2 plus 3 times the quantity 4 plus 5. So for this one, we're kind of looking at it and we're seeing that this expression really has 2 sets of parentheses in it. That in the first set, we have 2 plus 3. In the second set, we have 4 plus 5. And remember that those sets of parentheses are really there to tell us that here is what we need to do first. We have to evaluate everything inside the parentheses first. And so what we would do is to say that the 2 plus 3 is going to give us a value of 5. The 4 plus 5 is going to give us a value of 9. And then finally, the operation that we do, 5 times 9, gives us a final answer of 45. So now let's look at an example where we're actually seeing the division bar as a grouping symbol. So suppose we're asked to evaluate 2 times 3 plus 8, and we want that all divided by 7. Well, what the division bar is actually there telling us is that we are grouping all of the operations from the numerator together, and then we're also, as one set of operations, we're grouping all of the operations in the denominator as another set of operations, and finally, the division itself is there to say this is the very last thing that we are going to. And so how would we actually start to evaluate this? Well, we focus in on the operations that we have in the numerator. So we've got an operation of multiplication here in the 2 times 3. We've got an operation of addition here when we're adding on the 8. And so just going back to our order of operations again, multiplication is going to come before addition. So we would do 2 times 3 to give us the 6. And so we have 6 plus 8, and that divided by 7. Well, now we still have the operation of addition in the numerator, so we would do that. So 6 plus 8 is going to give us 14. Then we still have our division symbol, and we're dividing by 7. And so finally, 14 divided by 7 is going to give us a final answer of 2 for our expression. Alright, so now let's try a little more complicated example. And so let's say, suppose somebody wants us to evaluate an expression that looks like this. Well, kind of one of the first things that we're really focusing on is, again, we're seeing that division symbol. And we're seeing that division bar there one more time. It's going to act as our grouping symbol, and so that tells us that we're going to have to evaluate all the expressions in the numerator, then we're going to evaluate all the expressions in the denominator, and kind of our last step that we will do is to then do the division as part of it. Alright, so what would this thing actually look like to evaluate? Well, we know that we're going to do the numerator separately from the denominator. And so as we're looking at the operations in the numerator, we see that we've got this set of parentheses here with our 7 plus 6. We've got a set of parentheses here with our 3 plus 2. And so order of operations tells us parentheses are going to be first. So we simplify everything inside those parentheses as our very first step. That's what we're singling out first. And so what we would do, our 7 plus 6 is going to give us 13. Our 3 minus 2 is going to give us 1. And then our denominator is pretty much staying the same. We're not really going to mess with that at this step. Okay, so in our numerator, now we've got the operation of multiplication, and so our parentheses are all simplified now. Can't do anything else further inside those parentheses. So we've got the operation of multiplication here with 9 times 13. We've got an operation of 3 times 1 here, and then we've got the operation of addition. Well, we know that we're going to do multiplication before we do addition, and so that is exactly what we're going to do. Our 9 times 13, so if we do 9 times 13, that's going to give us 117. 3 times 1, of course, is going to give us 3, and our denominator, we could go ahead and in that denominator begin simplifying it. Again, we're seeing parentheses, we're seeing an operation of multiplication, we're seeing subtraction. So we simplify everything in the parentheses first. So we've got our 8 minus 4. 8 minus 4 is going to give us 4 in that denominator. Kind of our next step, 117 plus 3 is going to give us 120. And then in our denominator, we've got 4 times 7, which is going to give us the 28. 28 minus 16 in the denominator, and we're getting really close to having the whole thing simplified. So we have our 120, and that's going to be divided by our 28 minus 16. So our division bar, remember, is grouping the numerator denominator. So we need to finish all of the operations in the numerator, finish all the operations in the denominator, and then the division is our last step in that case. And so what we would do next is the 28 minus 16. So we have 120, and that's going to be divided by the 12. Well, 120 divided by 12, now we're down to the last step, and so we get an answer of 10. And so our big kind of complicated expression that we had there really just simplifies down to an answer of 10.